Hey YouTube, Brandon Ascari here with another awesome and insightful episode of Ascari Digital's Content Creator Academy, where I'm pretty sure it is my goal to help educate and inspire you to being the best and most successful freelancer that I know you could be. First, let's take a look at some test shots that I got with the BlackMagic Pocket Cinema 6K, as this is the second episode in our series of BlackMagic Pocket Cinema 6K reviews. So let's go over there and then we'll be right back. Ready? And... And we're back. So that was just a couple shots that I got of a very dear friend of mine, Anthony, playing guitar. Super talented guy. He also does art and everything like that. You should check him out on Instagram. AA_creations216, I think. Yep. So go ahead and give him a like over there, follow him, subscribe, check out all of his stuff, see what he's got going on. Awesome, insanely talented dude, and thank you for being a subject for our test footage in the second part of our series on the BlackMagic Pocket 6K. All in all, I thought it went really well. What we did was just took the BlackMagic Pocket 6K, threw on a 35mm Rokinon Cine DS 1.5 aperture lens so we could get a nice shallow depth of field. And the way that we achieved that shallow depth of field in the middle of the day was by using a variable ND filter. Mine is from Tiffin, and basically what that is like putting sunglasses over your camera lens so that way it lets less sun into the camera, and that allows you to open your aperture more, which lets more light into the camera, so that way you get a shallower depth of field. So remember, the more open your aperture is, the more light that comes through, and also the shallower depth of field that you'll have. And if you close the aperture down more, that means the less light that comes through the camera, and thus a wider depth of field. So all in all, I think the shots are pretty cool. The nice thing about the BlackMagic Pocket 6K is that it is insanely cinematic. The main difference between my primary video shooter is that the Sony, the A6400 that I'm using right now, tends to look video, new media-ish. It's great for YouTube, it's great for web series, it's great for even television, because I think it usually has more of that television look. Yes, with proper lighting and great, production design and all the other elements, yes, it can still look cinematic. It's just right out of the gate, talking about the camera quality alone paired next to the BlackMagic Pocket 6K, there's a night and day difference between what it looks like right out of the gate. So with that being said, there are pros and cons that I've already realized in this little shoot that I did. For me, it's the file sizes. The file sizes are ridiculous. If you're shooting simple stuff where it's not imperative that you're shooting 6K RAW, you really want this cinematic, Hollywood movie-like look, then I would say something like the Sony is gonna be a little bit better for you, because you're gonna have to invest a lot in external hard drives. Now, of course, because I freelance for a living, I have a lot of hard drives to begin with, so it's great for me. But someone who's maybe thinking about getting this camera and doesn't have a lot of real narrative clients lined up, it may not be the best choice for you as a first camera, maybe even a second camera, until you start building up that clientele that would call for something like this. I think all in all, with the footage that we gathered, those few clips that you saw, we have maybe 2-3 minutes worth of footage, maybe 4 minutes worth of footage, and that alone was about 50 gigabytes. So imagine if you were trying to do a full 10 to 15 minute festival length short film where you're going to have a couple hours worth of footage. You're looking at terabytes in one drive. You always want to have a second backup, so then really you're looking at, I don't even want to know, $600, $700, $800 in hard drives just to complete a short film. It's just very pricey for what you're going to be getting. Whereas you could shoot 4K 24 frames per second on the Sony A6400, beautiful, crisp, nice image, and you wouldn't even fill up a terabyte hard drive for a 10-minute short film. So you could probably get away with 500 gigs, but terabytes are so cheap, so you might as well just get those. Looking at it objectively from a more producer standpoint, in that we're seeing, is it cost effective? I would say that's the drawback to the camera. Of course, the battery life, which is why I have the adapter to the Sony NPF. Thankfully, because I do, and I use the Sony NPF batteries, I get a lot more shooting time with it. Otherwise, it would be absolute torture to keep swapping batteries every 10-15 minutes. It's just not economical. So the adapter that I think was $30 or $40 allows me to use bigger batteries that I already have and then get an hour or 2 hours of filming 6K RAW out of it, no questions asked, whereas otherwise it would be about maybe 10 minutes or so on the Canon batteries that they use. So other than those two drawbacks, then we have to talk about the pros. The pros to this camera far outweigh the cons, in my opinion, because you have arguably the most cinematic image that you could possibly get anywhere for $2,000. And what I mean by that is their image, to me, is the most comparable to an Arri for a low price budget. If it's not an Arri, I would say it should be a Blackmagic. If you ask me my thoughts about Red, it is cheaper than Arri, but I don't think they're really that good of cameras. It's just, I hear so many horror stories about overheating and just shutting down and not working and no one knows what's going on. So for me, that's not really the time-tested, durable champion like a Canon or an Arri. Blackmagic, I've heard about people having issues with it, but personally, I've never had them, and for a fraction of the price with image quality that's as close to an Arri, in my opinion, as you possibly can get, it's just unfathomable. And then, considering that you could shoot in 6K RAW on this camera, what? I mean, now there's cell phones that shoot 8K, which is ridiculous because the image quality is not even that good. From tests that I've seen, the 4K actually looks better in those 8K cameras, so that's beside the point. But 6K RAW, more than you'll ever need. I know for YouTube now, especially and other streaming platforms such as Netflix or Hulu, they really want you to have your deliverable in 4K, which is not really 4K, it's UHD, so 3840 by 2160. Cinema 4K is like 4096 by 2160, so you get a little bit more in the horizontal. But let's just say UHD 4K is the deliverable for most new media platforms, i.e. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, YouTube, stuff like that. If that's really what you want to deliver in and you want the flexibility to be able to reframe your shot and crop in a little bit and zoom in digitally without having to worry about having a dolly and a dolly grip and all that stuff, 6K is amazing. Do you need it? Absolutely not, by no means. In my personal opinion, 1080p looks perfectly fine if it's coming from a good camera with a good sensor, great dynamic range, stuff like that. But because the way that the industry is going, especially if you're trying to get your content on streaming platforms, it is imperative to export in 4K UHD. So for that, if you want that flexibility to zoom in or to crop in or whatever, reframe your shot a little bit and not lose any resolution, then shooting natively in 6K, so that way you do have that flexibility to go in a little bit and export in 4K without losing any resolution at all, is a huge bonus that most people are not even going to take into consideration. Of course, the trade-off is that you're going to have massive file sizes, so there is a downside to it, but having that option is amazing. Now, another thing that's amazing about this camera, as I talked about in the previous episode, is the menu system. Now, I've been a Blackmagic user since the original Pocket Cinema camera a while ago. Then I upgraded to the Ursa Mini 4K EF mount. Now, a lot of you are saying, well, why didn't you get the 4.6K? Well, honestly, I was doing a lot of ENG style work, and I was doing a lot of moving shots on handheld rigs and narrative work. So for me, that handheld, having access to a global shutter was imperative. So a global shutter compared to a rolling shutter just means that when the camera's whipping around back and forth, it doesn't have that rolling shutter that a lot of DSLRs and mirrorless cameras have. When they move the camera really fast on a pan, you'll see the image kind of like lag along with it, usually with trees and buildings and people. But with a global shutter, you don't have that. So that was really good if I'm doing documentary style work or if I'm doing, action scenes or something like that. So that's why I went with the 4K. Otherwise, it was terrible in low light, and it had its drawbacks with even bigger file sizes for 4K RAW, so it was a trade-off. Now that they came out with the Pocket 6K, I saw that and said, ooh, same mount, it's not Micro Four Thirds sensor size anymore, it's Super 35. With that same mount, the better sensor, now better low light performance, I think it's worth switching to from my Ursa 4K. So I did, and I have to say this camera's been amazing. Now, I haven't used it on that many jobs yet. I did use it for a couple of interviews that I did for for a client in Ireland, and a lot of it was just using natural light, what we had available to us. It was a real run and gun style situation. So for all things considered, it really held up great, considering that we had to push the ISO for the interior and we were just working with an ND filter and trying to work around the sun for the exterior interview. So it really went very well, all things considered there. But again, one of the cons with this camera is going to be the audio input. You don't have a full XLR like we did on the Ursa Mini. That one had 2 full XLR ins for a left and right channel. This one has 1 mini XLR, so for like a lav mic, if you're doing the interview like we did last week, you have to plug that into an adapter for a mini XLR into the camera, and it's 1 channel. You do have the option to use the second channel as a 3.5 millimeter. The only downside to the 3.5 millimeter is that it's really not a professional quality input. So if someone trips, then the wire's coming right out and you lose your signal. It just doesn't, it doesn't lock in like the XLRs, which is super important. Same thing as like an SDI cable versus an HDMI cable, where the SDI locks, the HDMI could just pull out accidentally. You move the camera wrong, it comes right out. It was too tight, something like that. That issue happens so often, and it just puts a lag on your production. So certain things like that are a drawback, but considering all of the upsides and the image quality, it makes up for that leaps and bounds, especially with the very user-friendly interface, the 6K RAW capabilities, having ProRes in there. You can downsize the RAW files. You could choose to shoot at 12:1, which means your file sizes are going to be somewhat manageable. When we did the clips that you saw in here, they were at 3:1. I forgot to switch it to 12:1, so then the file sizes were crazy. Like I said, 50 gigabytes for like 3 or 4 minutes worth of footage, which is nuts. But I did have the option to make that smaller. I just forgot to do it. I would really use the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K for a couple different environments and shoots that I would be on. For me, anything that is commercial or narrative-based filmmaking where you really want that super cinematic look and you need that high resolution to film with, that's really what it's made for. It's made for those highly stylized, very, very beautiful looking imagery. Things like that is where that camera is going to shine. Would I use it for like a live event of a presentation or something like that where someone's going to go on stage and talk for an hour and a half? No, you'd have 2 terabytes worth of footage. You'd be swapping CFast or SSDs all the time. It's just not feasible for something like that when you could use something like a Sony or an ENG build Panasonic or Sony or Canon that's made for those shoots where, okay, you don't have the dynamic range, but you have the ability to record for hours on an SD card. That's really what you want to do for those environments. You could use this for music videos. I do think the Sony does a pretty damn good job too, if you're asking me, but the Blackmagic definitely is going to give you that more stylized approach. And as long as you have the storage capabilities or the means to get said storage capabilities, then it's totally fine to shoot whatever you want on it. But long form interviews, sit down, talking head type stuff, I wouldn't use this camera for. Live events, I wouldn't use it. Like I said, for me, it would be more narrative-based film projects. It would be stylized commercials, maybe music videos. It would be a discussion you have to have as far as the look is concerned, which you should be doing on any project that you work anyway. You should always have the conversation of what is the look that you're going for? What are you trying to achieve? Send me some examples of what you are trying to achieve, and that helps us as creatives figure out what is going to be the best tool to use for that scenario. This is just my idea of general use for this camera, not necessarily a guarantee of, oh, you can only use it for this, you can only use it for that. It shouldn't be about what tool you're using, especially when you're first starting out. It should be, this is the tool I have access to, let me figure out a way to use it. That's going to grow and expand your creativity, so that way when you do have the option in the future, when you're working on bigger scale projects or you have access to more equipment, it will help you narrow down and hone in on which one is the best for that project. So anyway, what's coming up in the future? We're going to do some night footage test shots with the Blackmagic Cinema 6K, so that way we could see how does this camera perform in low light, how is that dual native ISO, and how does it hold up in these environments. And we're going to try doing a little short film with it as well, so you can see kind of how this thing puts the whole scope together and puts together a whole film creatively. Anyways, if you have any questions, as always, leave a comment down below. Don't forget, let me know what you think about the footage from the camera. Also, let me know what you think about the footage from the Sony. Why not? Do you have a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K? If you do, let me know what you think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear about what you've done with your rig to separate it and make it as good as it possibly can be, as opposed to just its basic starter package. But anyway, my name is Brandon Ascari from Ascari Digital's Content Creator Academy. Don't forget to give us a big thumbs up with that knockout punch. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell if you haven't already, so you could be the first one to see our episodes when they air Mondays and Wednesdays. And in the meantime, I will see ya!